But people's assumptions was that actually I only had one because I chose my career, that I didn't have time to have more kids. And that was so far from the truth. And I found that actually quite insulting.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Here's our guest host for this episode.
Welcome to API Futures, a podcast by Ascend where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. In this episode, we explore the inequities women face as successful career executives and parents. Our special guest host in conversation with Ascend's president and co-founder, Anam, is, ta-da, myself. For all of you who don't know, my name is Dion Lim. I'm a news anchor for ABC7 and also a member of Ascend. I am beyond honored to be part of this podcast, even more thrilled to be in conversation with someone I admire, someone I know, and someone who I really need to catch up with. It has been long overdue, Anna.
Very much so, Dion. And it's so wonderful to be doing this with you. When the team told me that this would be happening, I couldn't have been more thrilled. And first, just congratulations, Dion. So much has happened in your life since we last saw each other.
Yeah, and that's why I want to talk with you, because I have a 3.5-month-old baby boy at home, my very first and possibly my very only child ever. And I just had re-entry into work again this past week. And it's not easy.
No, and trust me, it's not necessarily going to get easier. I hate to say that to you, but easy is really just about context, right? But it's going to be amazing in terms of being a mother and raising your son. I had the privilege of raising a daughter who's now almost 23.
Wow.
So really almost on the other end of where you are. But you will so enjoy this time, even though it's hard.
Yeah, this is good because you can give me some hope, and hopefully everyone who's listening will also feel inspired after they listen to this podcast. So let's dive right in. I read an article in the Harvard Business Review, which cites this study that reveals, listen to this, between a third and a half of all successful career women in the country, they do not have children, but they do want kids. However, 79% of men surveyed wanted kids and 75% have them. I mean, Anna, when you decided to grow your family, tell us where you were in your career, your fears, how you find balance, if there is such a thing as balance.
So first, I always knew I wanted children. So it wasn't as a question for me, right? I'm pretty maternal in nature. I had really amazing role models of mothers in my life between my own mom, my grandmother, and my aunties. So for me, it wasn't so much of, should I have children or not? So that's first. I think it's important for all women and all people, right? Men and women, to really first decide if that is a pathway and a choice and decide for ourselves. So I think that's really important. For me, relative to when it happened in my career, I was actually at a very critical point in my career. And when I ultimately got pregnant and was about to have a baby was exactly the year that I was being considered for promotion to partner at my firm. So at that point, you're in a very competitive part of your career, because not everyone that is qualified even gets considered for partnership. And I remember I was 5 months pregnant before I even told my bosses that I was pregnant. You can imagine how creative I had to get on my wardrobe. People thought I was just gaining weight, maybe eating too much carbs and sugar, but it was a little bit more than that. And it was because I didn't want anything to disrupt the process.
Right.
And in hindsight, that was probably not the best thing to do. It was such a critical time in my life and such a joyful time. And I was actually hiding all of that from my colleagues. I couldn't even talk about both the pains and the trials and tribulations of being pregnant, which is actually a beautiful time in our bodies for those of us that are lucky enough to actually go through a pregnancy. And so I couldn't share any of that with any of my colleagues because I was kind of hiding the fact I was pregnant because I didn't want anyone to think that that was going to impact my commitment to my career. How silly was that in my younger self?
No, it's silly, but I understand because I was in the same boat. I mean, look, I'm in a competitive industry where you change jobs, you climb the corporate ladder, you get to a bigger market, more money, bigger television station. I would do this every 3 years when my contract was up. And starting from scratch, you can't suddenly be gone from the air like that for however many months while you're on leave, plus the comments and the questions people have. I didn't want that negative attention. I saw it as negative, but now that I'm on the other side, it must have been so hard for you to keep this all in. How did you ultimately make it through? Because part of the joy is being able to share this adventure with your colleagues, with your friends, but yet you felt like you had to keep it a secret.
I know, again, in hindsight, that was such a not rational thing to do, even though it felt very rational at the time. And I think it's just indicative of the anxiety many of us face and perhaps that conflict that's inherent every day around what we think will shape people's impressions of us, right? Just like the example you gave. In my case, literally, I told the firm I was pregnant just right after I was told I was going to get promoted. So then there was a second decision, right? Because it's not like you have your baby and you're back to work the next day.
Right.
And literally, right, a few months later I was going to be officially promoted. And then I was going to be out for a period of time. I remember going to our big global celebration for the newly admitted partners. And I was literally like on delivery watch and I had to travel out of the country. I was just on the cusp of not being allowed to travel. And I was the only person there who looked like that was pregnant, literally. And here I am at this global meeting, and everyone's like, "Oh, what are you going to do in your first year?" And I'm like, "I'll probably take maternity leave." And my big dilemma, then the second big dilemma was, well, how long of a maternity leave do I take? And keep in mind, this was in year 2000. So it's a really different time to now in terms of how people looked at taking leave from work. And I did something that was probably a little bit unheard of at that time. I took 6 months off
Wow.
in that first year of getting promoted. And I so treasure that 6 months at home and being fully focused on being, a mother and that experience that totally disconnected me from work. I was lucky, Deloitte, where I'm still a partner, was so accommodating. No one ever questioned, why are you taking that long of a time off? No one bothered me when I was taking my leave. But I did have a lot of anxiety when I came back because I felt behind. I was just, new into this partnership and I already felt behind in my first year as a partner because I took 6 months off. So those are a lot of things that I think we all have to deal with. And you're probably feeling like you're in this amazing, crazy catch-up mode, right? Of how do you catch back up and fill that last 3.5 months that you took off.
Yeah, I'm so torn. I think your story is inspiring because granted, not everyone has a great company like Deloitte, or for me, I'm very grateful that I work for ABC and Disney because we too have a very generous policy and I have 6 months total. And I'm choosing to break it up a little bit because I want to prolong it as much as possible. But it is disrupting because I'm going back for the holidays for a couple of months, and then I'm back out of the mix again. I had this big fear that people would forget about me, that my sources would stop talking to me, the story ideas, my brain would turn to mush. And it sort of leads me to my next question for you. What is it like being out of the mix? Because you're at home for weeks on end. You want adult interactions. And you contributed, I think, a very valuable piece of advice for women in the book, Women Mean Business. And it is something that saved me from going crazy. Talk about the importance of sharing contacts, because I think I actually networked a lot more in some respects while I was on leave. I was able to.
Yeah, you know this about me, Dion. I've always been a very organic networker, if that makes sense. I don't always network with great intentionality, right? I meet people if I enjoy them, if I have a commonality, then we have a connection and hopefully we have a lifelong relationship and friendship. And I found that also the case during my maternity leave, right? I was
Yes.
in a mother's group. I got to know my neighbors a lot better because I'd go and walk, go on these long walks. So I actually got exposed to even a wider array or a different array of people than maybe in my prior life, right? Pre mama life, because then all the women or the parents in the parent groups, I was able to build a deep relationship with. And definitely the network that I had leading up to having my daughter really carried me. So while I wasn't in the corporate boardroom or in the typical workspace, my colleagues really didn't try to call me for work. Many did check in with me, would come visit. So I had all this social time actually, where we weren't necessarily talking about work,
Yeah.
but we were really able just to connect about life and about parenthood. I got all this advice from people. And also, my family was amazing. My extended family, my aunties, my uncles, my dad, and the caring and the ability for me to receive that care and to be taken care of was also something that I treasured during that period because I think as working professionals, working women, right, we just do it all, right? We believe we do. We don't always get all the help from our family because we want to show we can do it.
Yeah.
But during that time, I think we can't do it all when you're a new parent. You have to have help. And if you're lucky enough to have people in your life that offer it to you, take that help because it comes from such a place of love and caring.
I used to be afraid of asking for things, but because of what happened to my body, my mental health, it's a struggle. Don't get me wrong. No, I have been forced to ask for certain concessions, which I would never do before. Calling out sick, unheard of. But I still have some medical appointments I need to take care of. And I just said to my manager, you know what? I need to do this for me in order to be fully ready to work and produce for you. And the response was great. Anna, in some ways, I think that going through this process has made me better at my job. The empathy that I have now, I think, is more understood. Do you think that that was the case for you too?
I definitely think so, because I think we realize there's a lot of things that people go through in life. It's not just during this period of pregnancy. People are dealing with a lot of health matters. They're not all issues, right? Some of them may be positive matters that we don't see. You can't see when I look at you, Dion, right? I don't necessarily know what you're going through, right? And especially for people that have, new parents, there's so much anxiety about getting it right because all these books, right? I remember reading all the blogs and books about how to be a great parent and what to expect. I
Yeah.
don't think anything really prepares us because each child is different. I had a very colicky baby.
Oh no.
And so I didn't get any sleep. Could never, like, I could walk for miles and could never, like, get her to sleep and calm down, right? For a period of time, but eventually you kind of figure it out, or the child figures it out. Also, I was lucky I didn't have postpartum depression, but I know many in my life have had, and there's struggled with that and how that morphed, right, over the not just those months of the early days of being, not only during those early days of parenting, but for even the years after. is tremendous. And those are things that quite often we can't talk about, right? It's not always that the environment is not accepting for us to talk about. We as an individual maybe don't always feel comfortable to talk about it at work. So I think just recognizing that and giving our colleagues more grace and giving our friends even grace when they don't show up the way we're used to after they go through something is something I definitely, was more appreciative as a result of being a new parent.
Very much so. It opens the doors to having conversations that were a little uncomfortable before. And it's nice because you realize that you have opened yourself up to a whole new world that you didn't expect. I never in my wildest dreams imagined talking about breastfeeding with one of my colleagues. It seemed so invasive before. But you discover very quickly that all shame goes out the window after giving birth to another human being. I think to myself about the pregnancy and the time off we took and more that I will be taking. And I remember going to Australia early in my pregnancy, and women would tell me they had up to a year of leave. And that got me wondering, what do you think workplaces could do more of to be supportive and equitable? I mean, granted, this is above everyone's pay scale because it's not as though we can change government laws. But do you have any suggestions coming from a level that you work at and have a say in your company of what can happen?
Well, it's you mentioned some of these policies that other countries, right, have actually legally mandated. I don't know if in our U.S. society we'll get to the same, right? We just have a different workforce structure. That said, I do think workplaces, one of the things they can do is figure out how to continue having the very open and honest conversation about career pathing during this period of time, right? I mentioned my anxiety about wondering if I was behind, if I was missing out, if there were going to be less opportunities put forth to me because people were making assumptions about my life as a new parent. And that impacts our mental health, that impacts the productivity. If someone's anxious and feeling insecure, they're not going to show up in their best selves at work. So, at a minimum, I think more around companies being able to have those counseling discussions and being able to help map out this is the plan, right? What do you want? And also, it's not just about taking the 12 months off. There's going to be different times, just like you've chosen to break up your leave. I think that is nice because there's actually different periods of time when you need the most help. It's not always actually right when the baby is a newborn.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, as a newborn, sometimes that's actually the easiest part.
That's what I'm
It's
told.
all those transitions, right, that they have that you might need to spend more time, right, than in a normal, your normal work schedule will allow, and being able to really have those honest conversations. And it's going to be different, I think, for every person because it depends on what your partner's doing. It depends on what kind of support system you have. So all those things, I think giving us the flexibility to choose when we need to take that time and what that time looks like is one of the most critical factors.
And then taking the extra step of actually taking the time.
Right.
And not having the guilt. That's something that I felt right away, and something that actually a parent friend of mine messaged me about yesterday, that he had been traveling for work all around the country and he felt tremendous guilt not being there for his son. And how do you deal with that? Because it's heartbreaking. I hear these stories, even for me now, it's still early in me going back to work, but I see this little face waving at, and he's waving. He looks real sad, even though I don't think he knows really what's going on. But is there a way to deal with those feelings? And how do you make up for the guilt?
In all honesty, I still have that. I still have that. And you would think 2 decades later as a parent, that would go away.
Yes.
But that guilt about not being a good enough parent.
Mm.
And in my case, my daughter, I've been a single parent for half my daughter's life. So that's even adding to that of, am I spending enough time? Am I going to raise a, fully functioning adult? Is she going to be psychologically sound as a human and be able to enter the world and do good things? I still actually have some of that guilt. And I think this is where your network is really important, where you have friends and people and colleagues that assure you a bit that you're doing the right thing. What I've learned through, and we won't have enough time to talk about it all in this webcast, but what I've learned through these couple of decades of being a parent is all you can do is try your best.
Mm.
And the best and how you define best is actually up to you. Don't even let your partner, if you have one, define that for you. Definitely don't let your family members do that, because frankly, what my extended family, their version of parenting is a little bit different than my version, right? They are dealing with different stressors than what I have to deal with, right? And I think also for those of us maybe that come from more traditional Asian families, that expectation of what a parent looks like is very different than, I would say, the modern expectation, right? As a parent and a spouse, right? We're expected to do everything, right? So much so, right? And our ability to also get help is limited. And so I just say define for yourself what best looks like and be a bit confident of that. And the best validation is when you look into your child's face and see how they're doing. Don't let others validate for you.
Oh, that's so good. And don't let others tell you everything under the sun and this is how you should do things, because everyone's journey is different. You and I know that people like to give a lot of unsolicited advice. You have one daughter, I have one son, and I've always said, after the pain and suffering of childbirth and just knowing me, I'm good with one. But it seems as though a lot of people like to force upon me, no, you've got to have two. 3 is the way to go. If you can do more than 3, that would be great. How do you deal with the detractors who look down on you for just having one? I almost feel like they're judging me for it, like I'm less of a mom.
Oh, there's less of a mom and even less of a person, right? For those of us that have only one or even choose to have none, there is some society view that we are not complete, right? And for me, actually, I never thought I would be a parent of only one child. I came from a very large extended family. My grandmother had 10 kids.
Woo.
My mom had 2. I always actually wanted to. That was not in my destiny. I had a series of miscarriage before and after uh, giving birth to my child. So, but people's assumptions was that actually I only had one because I chose my career,
Oh,
that I didn't have time to have more kids. And that was so far from the truth. And I found that actually quite insulting.
very much.
And also, even today, sometimes, right, people that have more children kind of make it seem like I had an easier time in life and in my career because I only had one offspring versus others that had 2 or 3 or 4. My advice, if you're in any of these, just don't make any assumptions of why anyone has 0 children or 1 children. There could be so many reasons why that person is in that situation. So don't assume anything about that. And I try not to. And there are different ways. You and I were talking about this before the recording. There's different ways to inquire about a person's intention without putting pressure on the person, right? Now, I accept that from my aunties and uncles. Again, they're from a different generation. I don't always accept that when it comes from my peers.
Yeah, aunties and uncles can get away with things.
Right.
Your colleagues cannot.
They've earned that with age to ask those unfiltered questions. And I don't get upset at that, right? I shouldn't. But us, we should know better.
And I ran into someone who said, now, was this a planned pregnancy or was this unplanned? None of your business. I have learned that there are certain things you just got to shut down and nip in the bud because it's very personal. And you're right. You have no idea what people are going through. And I actually heard once, this was before I was pregnant, someone said, you only work this hard because you don't have kids. And it's things like that that make me want to buck what they just said and prove them wrong, right?
Exactly. Again, these assumptions, and a lot of, I talk to a lot of our both Ascend members and also our Deloitte employees, and I think a lot of single folks or people without children find that quite offensive, right? The assumption that you are more available because you don't have children. Well, I might have other caregiving responsibilities or other things that I need to do outside of work. And why is that any less important than someone that has parenting responsibilities? So again, as a leader, I think we have to always check ourselves that we don't fall into the trap of making those assumptions or putting a filter of hierarchy of priorities, because it is not someone else to tell me what my priority should be of my time. It is actually my own choice. And then I have to manage. Right? And each of us actually have to be quite honest with that.
Yes. Oh, you give me hope, you give me strength, and I feel more empowered to do this journey after chatting with you because you've done it successfully, albeit with some guilt.
With a lot of guilt still.
A lot of guilt.
And guess what? Your children or the people in your life know how to take advantage of that guilt.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So be ready for that, Dion.
I remember actually those times as a teenager.
Exactly.
Okay, before we wrap up, I do want to give I do want to ask you a fun question because we are so plugged into our phones, our computers at all times. If someone, Anna, gave you 48 hours to run away, you'd have no phone on you, no one could reach you. Where would you go? What would you do? Who would you ask to join with you?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate in my life between Ascend and Deloitte and my other networks. I've had a chance to be with so many world leaders, all the living presidents, so much access. And so when I think about this question, actually, if I had those 48 hours and I could actually time travel, I'd actually bring my mom back. My mom passed away when I was in college. So she never actually was there to give me the parent and the life advice when I became a full-grown adult. I would take her, we would do a 14-day trek to Machu Picchu, and we would just talk. That's what I would do of using some of that 48 hours is really get the counsel from her when I think about her as an immigrant mother and how little she had and her ability to raise, in her case, 2 children before she passed. There's a lot of things I could have learned that would have probably made my life better. So that's what I would have used those 48 hours for.
I love that response. And on the topic of immigrant parents, real quick, I have learned through this process to give them forgiveness because my parents are immigrants from Taiwan and Hong Kong. And again, I had no idea what their struggles were trying to raise children in a whole new country and all that angst and anxiety I had growing up and blame that I had for them ruining my life. I think I understand now.
And you remember all those things when you were growing up. And my mom used to tell me, you'll know when you're a parent. And I never believed her, right? And when I became a parent and I was raising my own child, all those things, all those conflicts we had with our parents, and all of us do, even in the best of families, it's just our natural evolution. they all came back. And so I wish I could tell my mom, you were right. And that was actually good advice. But I guess that's not how life works, right? We have to kind of figure it out on our own. And that makes us better because we figured it out. But those little voices are still back there, what our parents told us when we were growing up.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out. It's a process.
And you will remember, don't try to be perfect. Just be your best self.
I love this. Anna, we need to do this more often. Maybe not via a podcast, maybe over coffee sometime.
Yes, we'll have to see each other again very soon.
Fantastic. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. This has been more than a pleasure.
Thank you, Dion, for all you do. And enjoy the journey. You're at such an amazing point in your life. Enjoy it.
Feels good. We'll see. Ask me how I'm doing in a few months. How about that?
Will do. Promise.
Deal. All right. So to wrap things up, make sure to subscribe to API Futures on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple. Thanks so much for listening to API Futures. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to API Futures, presented by Ascend, where we empower global leaders of tomorrow. Subscribe to API Futures on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple.